Hey, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do a epidural versus natural birth preference, pros and cons, and which one I prefer, all that fun stuff, because I did have both experiences with birth. My first son, Dominic, was an epidural birth, induced, medicated, everything. My second son, Carter, was completely all natural, unintervened, everything like that. So obviously I've had both types of birth from complete opposite ends of the spectrum, and we're gonna just go over my pros and cons for both. So I'm just gonna jump right in. I'm gonna not really get into like the birth stories because I'll do a whole separate video on that, but just my pros and cons for each type of birth. Disclaimer, I'm not like for or against either type of birth. Whatever you need to do to get that baby to this world is the best thing for you. You're the mama, you decide what you want, what you don't want, all that stuff. This is just my experiences. I know I watched a lot of videos like this when I was trying to decide if I wanted to do a natural birth or not, so hopefully this will help someone. So like I said, this is just my personal experience. If you're deciding between these two types of births, do plenty of research. That's what I did. Ask your friends who have done either one, so on and so forth. It's all about your comfort level. Every baby's different, every pregnancy is different, every mom is different, so that's just a big disclaimer here. So my birth with Dominic, I was induced at 39 weeks and 5 days because of high blood pressure. Like I said, I'm gonna just barely brief over this birth because I don't want to do like a full birth story because then this video will get very long. But basically, I was induced because of high blood pressure, and being induced sucks. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. It sucked. So I definitely don't think I could have done an all-natural birth if I was induced. I don't know, I didn't go that route because at the time that wasn't even in my mind. So I was induced. I had the Cervidil for 12 hours, did nothing, and then we started Pitocin, and Pitocin contractions are pure hell. So they were back to back, they were screaming, intense pain. I'm also a wuss and I have a very low pain tolerance. So that's just a heads up. I'm kind of a baby, but I was screaming in pain for hours. I was not dilating. I finally got to like a 3.5 and I couldn't take it anymore. Asked for the epidural, got the epidural. The anesthesiologist who did my epidural missed twice, so he had to like re-poke me 3 times total. It was miserable. I hated it. But I will be honest, the actual poking of the epidural was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. So that's a pro, but I'll get there in a minute. Got the epidural, obviously took the edge off, didn't completely take away the pain, and baby was born. I pushed for 3 hours and he was born. So that was my completely medicated birth. So my pros for having an epidural is, number one, it makes the afterwards, like the stitching and the delivering of the placenta, stitching obviously if you tore or if you had an episiotomy, that part is way better because you can't feel it at all. So I mean, you can feel a little, you can feel the sense of touch still, but you can't feel the pain. So the afterwards part of it was 100 times better. Very, very minimal pain. With the epidural, it obviously takes the edge off of the contractions, because with Dominic I was back-to-back contractions from Pitocin, which Pitocin is like a artificial form of oxytocin, so it brings on contractions medically, so it's obviously not like your body doing it on its own. So whew, it's rough. So the contractions were back to back and it was so painful. I was crying. So when I got the epidural, it did take the edge off a little bit, so that's definitely a pro. I had just a little bit of time to like get it together, like regroup, all of that stuff, so that's a pro. And the pushing isn't as painful. For me, it was still very painful, but it was not anywhere near as painful as it was with the natural birth, but it's not as bad. So those are honestly the only pros I have for my epidural. Now, everybody has a different experience, so if you've had an epidural experience that was way better than that, that's amazing. My cons for the epidural is the needle is huge and I'm terrified of needles, so that was not fun. Anything going into your back is kind of scary. It gave me the chills almost instantly, and then followed by a very bad headache that lingered for like weeks. A huge con for the epidural is that you can't move. So if you are one of those people who kind of need to like move around to get comfortable and figuring out which position you actually want to deliver the baby in, once you get the epidural, you cannot move. You are stuck in bed, basically on your back, or like they help you flip from side to side to get the baby to be in the right position, but you cannot get up and walk around, you cannot move, none of that, so you're trapped. Also for me, I still felt the pain even with an epidural, so it didn't seem to be worth it because I went through the pain of getting the epidural and then I still felt a lot of pain with every contraction. So I don't think my epidural worked the right way, but again, if you have a better experience with an epidural, that obviously could be different, but for me, I could still feel the contractions, and even though it wasn't as bad, it was still way more painful than I wanted it to be having an epidural, you know? So that was not fun. Another con is that I could not feel the pressure to push. Even though I felt pain, I couldn't tell when I was supposed to push. I had no idea what I was doing when I was pushing because it was my first baby, so I could not move him. Like, every push he would like barely come out and then he would go right back in, and it took me 3 hours to push him out because I could not move him because I couldn't tell if I was doing it right. So with the epidural, and again, this is just my experiences, I don't know if this is normal, but for me, with the epidural, it kind of made me not able to push the right way, so I was kind of stressing a lot and his heart rate dropped completely, which was really scary. So we had to like move fast and turn fast and push him out, and they almost had to use the vacuum, and luckily they didn't. My whole birth with Dom was the worst experience of my life. Obviously I got a beautiful baby boy out of it, so I'm super happy, but it was miserable. It was painful. It was torture. I would never do that again. It was so bad. So those are my cons of having an epidural. Now I'm gonna get into my unmedicated birth. Again, I'm not gonna go into this huge elaborate story about it because if you guys wanna see a birth video, I will do that. So with Carter, I was 38 weeks and about 3 days, and I started having contractions at home. My plan was to labor at home as long as possible because that way I would get to the hospital to have a baby, not to have an epidural. So I chose I wanted to try a natural birth with Carter because of the fact that I could not push Dom out. I couldn't move him. So I thought if I tried a natural, my body would help out. So I went into labor at home, started having contractions, but they weren't very regular, kind of timing them, so on and so forth. It ended up being real labor, so I stayed at home as long as possible throughout the night. When it finally got to a point where I was like, okay, this is real, this is miserable, and I don't think I can be at home much longer. We went to the hospital. I was 7 centimeters dilated when I got there. We got into a room, walked around half of the floor, 7 minutes later pushed a baby out. So it was very fast and very effective. So my pros about having a natural birth is that you are able to move, and this is something I didn't know I wanted, but I was so thankful that I had. So during the going from 7 to 10 centimeters, I was pretty comfortable. I mean, during the contractions it was painful, but because I was able to move around and get comfortable, I was not miserable at all. So that was very helpful, and being able to kind of like rock on the ball or go in the shower or bath if you needed to, all of that was very, very helpful. Another pro with the natural birth is that I could feel everything, and that may sound like a con, but to me it's a pro because I could feel him moving down into the birth canal. I could feel with every contraction him coming closer and closer to coming out. I could feel that my body was doing what it was supposed to do, and that's exactly what I wanted. That's exactly why I chose to have a natural birth. So that was perfection for me because I knew exactly what I was supposed to be doing and when, because my body just did it. Another pro is that you do get breaks in between the contractions. For me, with my epidural birth, I don't know if it's because I was induced, so the contractions were Pitocin contractions, but I didn't get any breaks in between them. With this one, the actual contraction itself is so intense, but then in between there was nothing, and it was a break, and I was like, okay, preparing myself for the next contraction. I got this, I can do this, and then you get to start over with the next contraction. So it's kind of like one at a time, and you get a break in between to regroup. Another pro with a natural birth is that the recovery is miles and miles and miles better, like 100% easier with a natural birth. I don't know why that is, but everyone always told me that it was, and it definitely was a lot easier. And another pro for an all-natural birth was that feeling of like, I'm a badass and I did it, and when the baby comes out and it's like you did this alone, like 100% not alone, but like it was all me, you know, like I had no help. It was all me, and I did that, and it was like the best feeling in the world. I know everybody talks about that like euphoric kind of Twilight Zone feeling, but that's exactly what it was. And I could go on all day about pros for having an all-natural birth, but I'll just leave it at this. The last one was that because I could feel him with every single push and feel everything he was doing, I pushed for way less. I pushed for only 7 minutes, if that. And with every push, I knew he was coming more and more because my body just did its thing. My body was doing what it was supposed to do, which is exactly what I wanted. And that helped and made a huge difference and made everything way easier bringing him into this world. And last, we're gonna go ahead and do the cons for having an all-natural birth. Now, I don't have very many, but I did try to come up with a couple because I know that there are some. It's just I have such a positive experience remembering it. So I couldn't think of any without like really putting myself there, but I did think of some. So here are my cons for having an all-natural birth. Number one, the pain is so much more intense, like obviously because you're not numb, you feel everything. And because contractions generally do this and then go back down, when it gets up to that peak, it is the most intense pain you have ever had in your life. At least it was for me, and nobody can ever prepare you for that. No matter how much they talk about it, no matter how much you read about it, you will never know it until you experience it. And I thought I was dying. At one point I thought I was dying, and that was during the transition stage. The transition stage was way worse than anything I could have ever imagined. And that's when the baby's coming from the uterus, kind of going into the birth canal to make his entry into the world. You feel everything. I felt like my insides were being ripped apart. That was rough. So that's definitely a con. And the only other con that I have is that the aftercare, as far as like being stitched up and delivering the placenta, that was a lot harder because I had an episiotomy with my first son. I did tear with Carter when I had the natural birth. I teared right exactly where I had the episiotomy the first time. So if you don't tear when you have your natural birth and you don't have to be stitched, then this con kind of goes away. But because I did tear and I had to be stitched, this was, it was bad. It was stinging and I felt everything, and you feel the stitching and the pulling out of the placenta, and that was rough. But all in all, obviously I will take those two cons over all the cons I had with the epidural experience. And obviously, like I said, this is just my experience. So that brings me to kind of the, if I had to choose between my epidural birth and my all-natural birth, I 150 times over would choose the natural birth again before I would ever opt to have an epidural. Again, because every baby's different and every pregnancy is different. If I ever had another baby in the future, I would absolutely wish and hope and try everything to make it a natural birth, but I will obviously do whatever I need to do or whatever that baby needs in that time to be more safe and get the baby here as safely as possible. For me, I 100% love my all-natural birth way more than my epidural birth, which is crazy because most people think having an epidural makes things easier, but that was not the case for me at all. So for me, natural birth, 100% prefer it over an epidural birth. And that's kind of just my experience, you guys. Again, this is just me speaking from personal experience. You guys do all the research you want and really ask around, ask your doctor, ask your spouse, figure out what's best for you guys. This was definitely what was best for me. And I'm so thankful I was able to have a natural birth. A lot of women aren't able to, and obviously, like I said, you do what you need to do to bring the baby here safely, but I'm very thankful that I was able to have my natural birth. Even if I never have another one, I'm so glad I was able to have that one. So anyways, now I'm rambling. Don't get me started talking about my kids because I will never shut up. So that's it for this video. That was just pros and cons of my epidural versus my natural birth, and I clearly would choose my natural birth any day. So hopefully this helped you guys. Sorry I talk a lot. I'm sure you guys are used to that if you've watched any of my other videos. So thanks for watching, you guys, and we will see you next time.